Hi, welcome to the Wandering DMs livecast. I'm Paul.
And I'm Dan, and today we're going to be talking about Thieves. So, Paul, we got a comment on our last show from Brian Sellers asking us to talk about Thieves. It'll be very helpful to him, and partly because there's such a wild variety of different rules modifications in the OSR around Thieves, and lots of people do it lots of different ways. So I would like to start off by quizzing you.
Oh.
And just for anybody watching this, I did not tell Paul about this beforehand.
Okay, wait. Let me give a little just before we get into the quiz and to buy myself a little time. I just want to mention in the response to that comment, I did mention that what I really wanted to talk about was clerics, because that comes up a lot, especially with their removal in OED. So this might be the first of a two-part discussion, because I do want to return to clerics and why they're missing from OED, and why I would have chosen a different class to remove if I was going to remove one of the four.
So anyway, so OED games. OED is the original edition Delta house rules that we kind of both use, and you can see more on oedgames.com if you want to see the current state of it. Yes, we don't agree about every single thing there, so there's a little difference of opinion there. So I kind of like these questions when they come up in more than one place, when they're kind of in the D&D zeitgeist. And so coincidentally, I think a day or two ago on the Facebook AD&D group, someone asked the question if the most commonly known halfling in literature, namely Bilbo Baggins, is identified as a burglar or a thief in The Hobbit. Why in basic D&D are halflings fighters by default and not thieves? And so I will pose that question to you, Paul. Do you know, it's not a super difficult question, but do you know the answer to that?
I would assume that they were more evocative of Lord of the Rings than The Hobbit. Because certainly Merry and Pippin, I would say, are not burglars. They are much more fighters. How's that?
Oh, that's a good answer. that's a great answer that I did not expect.
Yeah, I think they doesn't one of them joins King Theoden, right? And he like has a sword and armor and stuff. I seem to recall. It's been a long time since I read Lord of the Rings.
This is actually a major issue in my campaign, actually, because one of the players made I call them hobbits, and in the game, expecting to die quickly. And she didn't, and she's incredibly powerful. She's the frontline fighter, and has in OD&D maxed out the level cap at 4th level, actually, and has been recently asking, is there any way to break through that level cap? And so that actually has become a bit of a plot point in my campaign. Anyway, so here's that's a great point. So another possible answer is that in original D&D Volume 1, right? You have originally hobbits, halflings, and do you have thieves in this book?
No, you don't.
You don't. There you go. Right. So of course in Volume 1 you have 3 classes. You have fighters and magic users and clerics, and then you have the races there. And each of them, by default, work in one of the classes. So at least when halflings first showed up, thieves weren't a thing. And as we both know, and so did the person commenting there, they were first officially published in the first supplement, where you have thieves there.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite anecdotes of someone once running an OD&D game back sort of when this was a new, when OSR was just burgeoning. And it was unusual to see OD&D at a convention. So allegedly the story goes is someone was running an OD&D game at a convention. A player comes up and says, "Oh my gosh, original Dungeons and Dragons, that's so cool. I want to play a thief." And the DM says, "Well, you can't, because there are no thieves in OD&D." And the guy looks really disappointed and says, "Oh, drat, I super wanted to play a thief." And the DM says, "Then steal something." I love that little moral there of, you know what, just bring it to the table. You want your character to do something, bring it.
And I think similar things have been said about assassins and spies, right? So in original D&D, you do have, it's in the DM's book, you have a list of agents you can hire, and among them there's an assassin, and among them there's a thief. Sorry, there's a spy.
Right.
And so some people will also say you don't really need in advance. You don't need a specialized assassin class.
Yep.
Just go kill somebody.
Yep. Likewise, when I was running the A modules and I tried to translate the existing characters, the pre-gens, into, I can't remember if I was running them as, I think I was running as BX at the time. There was no illusionist, and one of the characters is an illusionist, so I just named him the illusionist, and I gave him a bunch of spells that were kind of illusionary, and it's fine. You don't need it. You don't need a special class for that.
That's an even easier call. I totally agree with that.
So was the Hobbit question part of the quiz? How am I doing?
Yeah, I would give credit for that. So I thought the best answer was when halflings showed up, thieves weren't available.
Oh yeah,
but
yeah.
That's a
Now that you say that, it makes perfect sense.
Totally great interpretation, actually. So I think I give you full points for that.
For what it's worth, I seem to also recall that Gygax really liked The Hobbit and wasn't a fan of The Lord of the Rings. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So that totally undoes my answer.
Interesting. Yeah. So as far as the history goes, so you and I know that they both showed up in the first supplement to original D&D.
Yep.
And as usual, John Peterson would be the one who informed me about the prior history to that. Is that after original D&D was published in '74, there were a lot of fan creations rolling around, and you and I were talking about something similar right before this cast, actually. And so there were a number of fan creations suggesting a thief class.
Yep.
One of which, I guess, by Gary Switzer, who sent that to Gygax, and then Gygax subsequently published a version in a fanzine called, I guess, the Great Plains Wargaming Newsletter or something like that in 1974. So even to begin with, there were already a whole bunch of different versions running around prior to the first supplement in 76, I guess, 75, yeah. And so it's true that there's always been like a wide variety of interpretations of the thief. Which one do you most commonly use in your game, Paul?
Which version of a thief do I commonly use?
Yeah.
Let's see. What the heck am I running these days? So I'm
using. You still have them in your game.
Yes.
Right
yeah.
now,
yeah.
right?
I do because, like I said, I'm lazy and I'm not about to write all the volumes of stuff you've written for OED. So I just try to run OED as close to by the book, and I hate to use that phrase, but as close to it as I can. So I use pretty much all the stuff you have written in OED for Thieves. But I'm not using your encumbered system. No way.
Well, that's nuts. Have you ever tried it?
Yes. Oh, thirds. Oh, I can't stand thirds and sixths.
You actually tried it?
Yes, and
really?
Not a fan.
Really? Okay.
Yep.
Well, all right. That's a different. Okay, that's going to go on the list of future topics. So anyway, so if we.
Yeah.
So if we dig into Thieves, right?
Right.
So one of the things when it showed up in the supplement is the. Is that visible there? Okay, so there's the list of skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so people frequently looking at this, so they're percentile based, and that's unlike the standard D&D combat or saving throws or whatever that use a D20. And a lot of people will look at that and ask, well, why in the world does this particular system have percentiles in it? And one of the reasons would be that they just didn't think about a standard mechanic. And generally, at that point, they were still thinking about mechanics in terms of percentiles. And for the thief skills there, originally they were all in 5% increments. And so there's certainly, one of the reasons why the D20 was used was that it simulates 5% increments nicely. And I think a couple months ago, John Peterson dug up a very old original draft before D&D was published, in which they were talking about the combat system, and they were saying, well, AC2, that's going to be 2 pips on a D20 to hit, or 90%. And AC5, that'll be 5 pips on a D20, which will be 25%.
I think it's worth noting, of course, that the original D20s, as we know, were not 1 through 20, right? They were 0 through 9 twice. So a lot of folks would do various things. They either color the numbers or roll a d6 alongside to determine 1 through 20. I bring that up because I also believe that they were then commonly used as we currently use percentile dice. So you could roll 2 of them together to get any number between 1 and 100. And I believe I've seen some of like the advertising for those original sets of D20s, and they're often lauded as being, now we can finally have percentile gradations. We can do, right. So it seems like to me, my interpretation of that is, it seems like the community really liked to talk about percent chance of whatever, and so to have dice that allowed you to do any arbitrary percent chance was a big selling point for the D20.
Yeah, and so obviously, you know, originally, if you're looking at real world research, which is where a lot of these games come out of, wargaming and stuff like that. If you look at real world research, it's going to be, that stuff's going to be published probably in percentages.
In percents, right.
So obviously the most convenient thing is to take those things directly and turn them into percentages if you can. So I certainly agree with that, and certainly they were thinking, even if they were talking D20s, you know, I think mentally they were analyzing the stuff in percentages. So it's not super surprising that would get worked in at least one place. Right, the treasure tables also have the original treasure tables also have percentage type stuff.
Yep. Too. Yeah, I think I suspect that in the early days, gamers were very accustomed to sort of taking a percent and figuring out how do I dice this. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously in OED, I switched that to a D20, and to make it look like combat rolls and saving throws, and also wizards gaining spells. So at least the way that I run it, and I guess you do now, is you roll D20, you add your thief level, you also add your dexterity bonus, and that together basically simulates the same percentages in original D&D. Maybe they're 1 pip off out of 20, assuming like a reasonable dexterity bonus, basically.
Yep.
So that said, when new players play the game, and I run it directly out of the original D&D book, and at first level you've got maybe a 10% chance to pick a lock. Actually, I don't need to guess. I can just look it up. Yeah, so 10% chance to remove a trap, for example,
right.
First level. The players generally try that and then find out what the mechanic is, and the response I've heard a number of times is, "Oh, this is totally useless."
Well, but that's of course the same percentage chances they were as percentiles, right? At least that's true in BX.
I'm not right. There's no difference there. So I'm talking, even if I take the original percentile, whatever the mechanic is, you use the original percentile rule. They try it once or twice, and they go, well, these skills are totally useless.
Yep.
I had 90% chance not to pick a lock or pick a pocket or remove a trap.
Yep. And I've had players also point out that, like, by the time the percentages get to a level that are somewhat useful, you have magic items to overcome all those obstacles anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly reasonable critique, actually.
Yep.
Yeah. So now, on the one hand, I think I've seen Gygax or somebody claim at one point that the thief class wasn't intended for player characters. Like, the claim was this was intended to be hirelings and NPCs, and therefore you just shouldn't worry about that.
Sure.
But I mean, obvious for players, there's a lot of people that want to play that, like your example at the convention.
Yep.
It's an attractive class, so people are going to pick it. So one thing that I have started doing fairly recently, actually, is, and I don't think I've ever told you this, is I've started giving people 3 retries on all thief skills.
Interesting.
So if there's a particular lock, you can try. And that's not, so technically I'm not breaking the rules, because it actually doesn't say in the original rules one way or the other whether you can try things twice or not.
Right.
So I feel like I'm kind of, massaging things a little bit. And so if someone has a lock, you can try it once, twice, 3 times. If you fail it 3 times, then you have to level up before you try again.
I mean, that's always, I feel like that's always the question too, is what is the repercussions of failure, right? Like, if I fail to open the lock, can I just keep trying at it? That's a little easier than, say, like, if I remove the trap, does the trap go off if I fail? Right.
What is your ruling on that?
My ruling right now is no. It does not go off. You merely fail to remove it. And mostly that's simply because, like, again, the skills are so difficult. I feel like the players need some value out of this. Or what's the point?
I completely, totally agree with that. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to jump in here. Because we're going to talk about clerics next time and how you've removed them, I feel like I need to come out and say that my solution, if I were to sit down and write my own rules, would be, of course, to stop using the thief class. I would just use OD&D as written, bring the cleric back, get rid of the thief. It's the first inkling we have of a skill system. I despise skill systems. Let's get rid of him.
Yeah, and so obviously I go in exactly the opposite direction. So
Yep.
in OED, I got rid of the cleric and do use the thief. So my canonical three are fighter, wizard, thief.
But do you feel like you're going through a lot of machinations to keep propping up the thief as a useful character?
Not really. Not really. I do this one. I like you. I am generous with failure. I actually do. I do have some kind of bad thing happen on a natural one on my D20 system. I do that. Other than that, I tell people, except for a natural one, there's no chance anyone's going to spot you picking their pocket. There's no chance of a trap going off. And now I do this 3 retries. I think that's really the only major adjustment.
I think so. For me, I think the real benefit of the thief, I think most of the skills are sort of an aside, and the real benefit of the thief is the backstab.
Interesting.
That I think is the ability that is seen generally by my players as the standout. Oh, this is cool. This is what makes this character fun. I can try to sneak around and backstab.
I have seen that. I've seen that at high levels. Like so, when I run a high level convention game, that's the impression. My low level campaign, that has not been the impression so far.
Let me ask this question then: how do you allow backstab in normal combat for your thieves?
Yeah, what I'm doing, so that I'm a little strict there. So what I'm doing now is you take 1 round, you have to make a move silent check. You don't get any other action. And then on success, the next round after that, you get an attack with possible multiple damage.
I do something fairly similar, except I think I don't require full round action for it. So any given round, you can make a move silent. If you succeed, you can backstab. Otherwise, now if you fail, do you still let them attack?
I think yes.
Yeah. I did that as well. Yep.
I think.
Yeah. I always ruled that the fail on the move silent means simply that you are noticed. And so it's not a backstab, but you can still swing away.
Yeah, interesting. See, it actually comes up so infrequently. So my low-level thief characters, they don't want to get in the fight, actually.
Interesting.
So they've been hanging back and using missile attacks because they felt sufficiently frail. I have one character that really would like to get some kind of heavier armor, actually. So they might possibly multi-class, I guess.
Yep.
Actually, my thieves have not wanted to get in the combat so far. So actually, the last time a backstab came up, it would be like months ago.
I'm thinking back to when I was doing longer campaigns of BX. I would say my thief characters, if they did multi-class, they would multi-class into wizard, and generally what they were after was the ability to turn invisible. So the invisibility basically gave them a guaranteed backstab. It allowed them to sort of behave like a scout, which is an interesting role for the dungeon exploration phase. That's usually what I saw from my thieves.
Yeah, I mean, so far with low level, they're much more emphasis on the searching for traps, wanting to remove it, looking for stuff, etc., etc.
Let's go into my favorite.
So before we do this, so I got to say, so just to be clear, and a lot of this can be offloaded to the clerics discussion. My main thing with Thieves Not Clerics is not mechanical, but it's world building. And so if I look at traditional pulp literature, I see wizards and I see warriors and I see thieves. They're pretty commonly referenced, but what I don't ever see is I don't see miraculous spellcasting, healing, armored clerics.
Yep.
And so that seems to bend the sword and sorcery fantasy sufficiently far that clerics really irritate me in a dozen ways or more. So that's my emphasis is really on the world building issue, not the mechanics.
In that direction, I mean, that's definitely let's earmark that for whether or not there should be wholly individuals in the world building side. Let's talk about that when we talk about clerics. In terms of like world building, are there thieves in my world? In my imaginary campaign I'm thinking of, where I eliminate thief and have just fighters, magic users, and clerics, are there thieves? Hell yes, there are thieves. They are fighters and magic users who choose to steal.
Yeah, there's a rule of 3 thing for me that I like the idea of 3 classes. That feels very good. Yeah,
Great.
Having just two classes would weird me out.
Mm-hmm.
That feels like an unstable stool.
So clerics.
But they're
Okay, let's move on. Focus on Thieves. So, okay, I want to talk about.
I respect your crazy opinion.
I want to talk about my favorite ruling of thief abilities, which comes out of me possibly either correctly analyzing or weirdly twisting the printed version of BX, and I have it here for me, so because I knew we would reference this. In the basic book, I'm going to try and hold this up, and it's probably not going to work. Forget it. Okay. In the list of thief abilities, we have open locks, find, remove traps, pickpockets, etc., etc. So I'm going to focus on find or remove traps. That's what it's called there. Switching over to the expert blue book, it tells me here that the thief ability is remove traps. The find is conspicuously missing from the chart.
Well, and see, that's traditional. So if I look at the supplement 1 original D&D, likewise, you have removed traps, and I can't figure out how this works. Anyway,
yeah.
There's remove traps, and there isn't any find traps. That's that's the original way the class was published.
Excellent. So I assume from my reading of the BX that it is the basic book that is incorrect. That find should have never been included, and that
it was added. It was added.
How do you know that? Oh, you mean as opposed to the OD&D book?
Correct.
Right, but by the
I don't think it's an error in basic. I think it was an intentional change.
Well, but then why is it missing in the expert book?
Well, I think that Cook. Well, okay. Now I'm speculating.
Yes.
But I think that David Cook a lot of the time was trying to cue more. I don't know. Maybe he was just looking at OD&D. Well, but yeah, I think he was looking at OD&D to have the full list from level 1 to 14. And he probably just copied that from original, probably.
It's possible. It's possible.
You know, let me grab my Holmes book.
So the reason the reason I bring it up before we go too far down the rabbit hole here, the reason I bring it up is I do prefer the ruling of that the thief ability is to remove traps, and that all characters can find traps, and there is a generic way to do that. That thieves are not particularly good at it. Anyone can do it. And personally, when I'm running games, I try to encourage my players to just interact with the environment and ask probing questions. And if they ask good probing questions, I just tell them. But then if we have to fall back on the dice, then it's a 1 or 2 in 6 chance to find a trap. But only thieves have that skill of carefully disabling a trap such that it won't go off.
Here's the Holmes rules, and same thing as original and Cook. Actually, it also has, just like original, has remove but not find traps. And I totally agree with your ruling, Paul. I basically do the same thing. Themes in OED don't have any special finding capacities. Everybody can do it. I also emphasize in original. There's a line that says even to be more specific, the remove traps in original is only for small things like a poison pick and a lock. It's not for large things, actually. So as far as my ruling with OED goes, same thing. Everybody can search equally, and the remove traps is actually only for small things that you can't describe narratively how you're doing it. So it sounds like you might emphasize more the interact descriptively with the environment, and I tend to go for the D6 pretty quickly when people say that they're searching something.
No, inevitably my players don't often take me up on that, right? I push on it and I try to encourage it. And there are certain key obvious ways. So for example, if there are pit traps and the players decide to take a 10-foot pole and tap the floor as they go, then they will find the pit trap, and I don't roll.
I had a level recently. There's lots of pit traps.
Yeah.
And I actually was rolling, because I feel like a pole itself may not swing the heavy trap door, and they, so that tricked them once, and then after that they were, well, I try again.
Yep.
And there was always a little bit of uncertainty about whether they had just failed a couple times. but similar overall effect, I would
Yeah.
say.
I assume the trade-off there is that there's nothing quiet about slamming your 10-foot pole into the ground ahead of you as you move along, right? We're not talking about like little gentle love taps like a blind man with a cane. We're talking about really like, bam, jam it in there, try and make the floor give way.
Right, and if the trap is set up to like only give away for a 200-pound man, tapping it with a pole isn't remotely going to do the same thing. So that was my ruling on that, actually.
Yeah, so I've had my players find traps in other ways, holding a candle to a wall to look for a draft, or pouring water on the ground to look for cracks. And generally, if I can logically say, yep, there's a trap door here, it's well hidden, but they poured water on the ground, they're going to find the leak here.
Interesting.
Then I don't bother to roll.
That's a little bit more detail than I go into, but everybody can try it. I think if somebody... It's interesting. I should maybe try to work that in more. And one thing that's nice is, dwarves are better at finding one kind of trap, and elves are better at finding another kind of trap, and so that all kind of works into everybody sort of has a role to play in the different searching. So I totally agree with that, and I like Thieves not having a special. But of course, it shows up in advanced, right? So that find traps, remove traps is also written that way in advanced D&D. But I agree with you that I prefer not having a special thing for them.
Great.
Yeah, totally. I dropped my index card here.
So let's talk about the one thing that thieves are always good at: climbing.
Yeah, great, good. So.
Right, I'm looking here at
done originally. Is that in a?
I'm looking at my BX book here, and I can tell you, first level thief has an 87% chance to climb a sheer surface, and it goes up from there.
Okay, well, see, I think this is something really kind of interesting. In original D&D, it's a chance to fall, right? And so basically, it is, what is it? It is 13% minus your level.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So
same math.
So that one, right? So that one has a remarkably high chance of working.
Yep.
And then you can debate about, well, speed. Do you roll once on the climb or multiple times, stuff like that. But it has a remarkably high chance of working because it's set up originally as 13% to fail minus your level, and then that got modified in all the later rules into your chance to succeed, which starts off at 87% and stuff like that.
Interesting choice at 13. I wonder, is that because that's 1 in 6?
I tend to think that great question. I tend to think that Gary saw like 12th or 13th level as like the max, right?
Yep.
So that's where the magic user gets their name level. And if you look in advanced D&D, most of the spell examples say your chance for this is such and such. For example, at 12th level, the magic user will be doing this and this, will be using this much area for their spell or something like that. So I tend to think he saw 12th level as the maximum of the system, and so at 13th you would then be, I guess it's a minimum of 1% chance of failing here.
So I think my theory then is that high level chance of success at climbing a wall, or small chance of failure, really cements that thief role of the sort of exploration mode advanced scout, right? Inevitably, when we hit a cliff or a chasm or whatnot, it's the thief who gets to go first and bring the rope to the other side.
Right. That's great. And the other thing I'll point out is that and one of the reasons why I was so glad to get original D&D fairly late in life is there's a place in advanced D&D in the DM's guide where there's a modification which says if you are climbing on a slightly slippery wall, like maybe a dungeon wall with moss, your chances of falling are double. And if you're climbing on a very slippery wall, like water or ice or something like that, your chances of falling are quadrupled. Now, that doesn't make any sense as a mechanic when the chance is expressed as a chance to succeed, like 87%. Right. But that totally makes sense only in original D&D when the chance was expressed originally as a chance to fall. So that's one of those things in AD&D that confused me for years and years until I saw original D&D. It was like, oh, I see that. It only makes sense in this situation.
I mean, it seems like the sort of thing that they figured out when they said instead of blocks of text, let's draw charts, and somebody went, oh, this one skill is backwards. Can we just flip it?
Yeah, agreed. So in OD&D, I roll that on a D6.
Do you?
Because I certainly don't want any percentile stuff based in there. Is that how you do it, or do you do it according to BX?
I'm at this point I can't even recall. I don't recall it coming up since I've switched to OED.
Okay.
Certainly when it was BX, it was all percentile.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're using it as a D6 now? Is that what you said?
I am, yeah. So I do it on a D6, and you get a +1 per 4 levels of thief or something like that.
Okay, so you've just kind of rounded a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Subtract some stuff for encumbrance. Again, you got to fail by 2 in order to fall. You can fail and just be stuck for a round. If you fail by 2, then you're going to fall.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It hasn't, I gotta admit, it hasn't been coming up a whole heck of a lot lately. Maybe I don't have a lot of vertical stuff in my dungeon right now. Yeah. And my players are also gun shy, because like a year ago I had a rule whereby, and you suffered from this, whereby anytime you were on a rope, there was a 1 in 20 chance the rope would break all the time, and you got
yes,
you got hit by that like 3 times.
We suffered from that greatly, and I believe at the time I overreacted to how angry I was about that. But in retrospect, it makes sense, and I think we just got screwed by the dice.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I have backed. I've dialed that down a bit. Now there has to be some significant snap on the rope. Like you either have to fall or it has to get bitten. It doesn't always happen.
So for you or any of our listeners who are interested in an adventure that this is going to come up a lot in, I would recommend Stone Sky Delve. It's an OSR publication. It was run, I think, as a tournament at Gen Con 2010. It's really great if you like to play with vertical space. And I won't say any more so as to not include spoilers.
And of course, the game where you and our friends were playing in was Rappanathic.
Yep.
Specifically, going down the well.
Yep. Don't go down the well.
Poorly. which is an adventure that we both like quite a bit, I think.
Yes, absolutely. It's a great adventure. It's Frog God Games. And I think also it has some interesting terrain features in there. Certainly some levels with some exciting vertical motion. Definitely. I wouldn't say
it's a product. Yeah.
Sorry, I wouldn't say it's all over the place, but there's definitely it's featured.
Yeah, and it's a product that's been evolved obviously over a great many years, so there's a lot of variety in it in different places.
Right.
Yeah. So one of the questions was, maybe this might be close to the last thing, was, is the backstab, which you found to be the most important thing in the Thief, dialed into the right power level? So according to the book, at 1st level you do double damage, at 4th level you do triple, at 8th level you do quadruple. Is that appropriate, or is that too much?
I think it's good. Certainly, every time I've used it, it always feels good, right? By the time you get into triple damage is the point where, what is that, it's 4th level triple?
Yeah.
So by then, you're maybe going to pretty much soon, not quite there, but very soon your wizards are going to start shooting fireballs. Hit point levels are going up much higher. Triple damage feels pretty good, I think, at that point. Yeah, I think it's good. It definitely, my experiences and my players really like it, and it's definitely a major feature of the Thief class.
Yeah, and I agree. So, like I say, in my low-level games, it hasn't been coming up too much, but in my convention games, when the Thieves are doing triple or quadruple damage, everybody likes that. There's usually big cheering at that kind of big event. The Thieves, some people actually say occasionally the Thieves are stealing the spotlight in the combats. And, it's sufficiently risky that I really kind of don't mind a high risk, high reward.
I think my players always cheer when a backstab takes down a big enemy. Even if they didn't realize but that big enemy only had 1 hit point left, it's still exciting. Yeah,
don't tell them that.
Yeah, no. I want to touch on one thing, the ruling that I make that I'm not sure is common, but it's just from staring at the Thief skills for a long time. You have both move silently and hide in shadows. And the question often comes up, when do I use one versus the other? Do I have to use both? Why isn't there just one stealth skill? And the explanation I've come up with and what I use is that move silently and hide in shadows are different because one involves movement and the other one expressly does not. So for me, hide in shadows, in order to hide in shadows, you must not move. And once you do start moving, if you want to be sneaky at that point, it's a move silent roll, not hide in shadows, because you're no longer hiding in the shadows.
Yeah, that's interesting. So do you ever call for both at the same time?
Never.
Never? Interesting.
Never. It's so hard to do either that asking for both is basically saying you're going to fail.
Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't. I think that in theory, there might be a situation where I might call for that. Like if you want to be both. So to me, it feels like mostly one is visual and one is audible. Mm-hmm. And I agree. If someone was in a stationary ambush, I'd ask for hide in shadows, obviously alone. I think I might, if someone was trying to sneak up alone in an ambush, unseen and unheard, I might ask for both, but it's never happened to date.
Yeah. So typically what I see is if somebody's moving up on someone, trying to remain unseen, that they're trying to do it in such a way as to remain out of sight lines, either by taking cover or swinging around or whatever, in which case I think hide in shadows isn't going to come up anyway if you're talking about visual range, right? Whereas they're clearly moving, and so they might be heard. Whereas if you're going to lay an ambush, I'm going to wait here behind this rock until the guy comes around the corner and jump out and get him, then that's clearly a non-moving, I'm trying to hide, I don't want to be seen until he's right on top of me. So the one case I think that becomes unusual is I'm directly in front of my opponent and I'm trying to approach him in a way that is stealthy, in which case for me, common sense kicks in and I go, no, that's not possible.
Okay, all right. I think I would make the two rolls. I think I would give them a chance at being supernaturally successful at that. It hasn't happened in memory.
Yeah, I guess I would push against anything supernatural or that level for a thief. I think for me, thief skills should all be in the realm of what a real person could do. They are not magic. They are not a magic class. They are not using invisibility or elven boots. If they are, that's a different story. Pure thief skills. You're not Superman. You're just a guy.
That one I would go in a different direction with. At high level, at high level, like the hit points already put you in super normal, supernaturally blessed categories. So if you make two rolls, I would let them do that.
This is I can say certainly this is a point where I agree strongly with Matt Finch in his old school primer, where he basically says the power scale of D&D is always low. That it is always, we're not Superman, you're Batman, and you're not Batman, you're trying to become Batman. At the top level, you'll become Batman, who is still just a guy with cool equipment and no supernatural abilities.
Well, interesting. Anyway, so I'll say usually I'm using one thief skill at a time.
Yeah.
And the most common time is if someone's trying to do a backstab, they're in combat, there's a bunch of chaos. People probably can't track you individually. You make one move silently check to try to get behind somebody. I would if someone was coming from the forward direction, I would make two rolls and let them.
So once we get into combat and there are multiple combatants fighting, at that point I will go straight into the just every round. If you want, you can make a move silent, and if you succeed, it's a backstab. And the only case where I don't allow that is when you're like one-on-one combat, right? Once it's you versus one other individual, there's nothing distracting them. I don't think you're going to sneak around behind them.
Yeah, I broadly agree with that. I think the way that I'm doing it is you can get one off every other round. Reasonable. Totally reasonable.
We're definitely now really skirting close to the whole point of ruling's not rules, right? Like at some level, you got to take the situation into account and use some logic.
Yeah, and those are reasonable. Yeah, they're reasonable. Yeah.
So, we should start thinking about wrapping this up, Dan. But I'm really curious. Did I pass the test? Was there a test in there?
Yeah, with an unexpected answer. You did.
It was a one-question test. I see. I was expecting more questions.
No, that was it. Why are hobbits fighters?
Excellent.
Why are hobbits not thieves when they ought to be?
Excellent. Okay, good.
So of course, as soon as the thief came in the book, it was always an option for hobbits. So
right. It's funny, and my players often fall into that, or when I introduce new players to OD&D, they're always, when I tell them, oh yeah, you can mix and match classes and races, they think that it's quite funny to make a Hobbit fight. Oh, I make a Hobbit fighter, how unusual. I'm like, actually, that's the standard. Well, they seem to tend towards that direction of thinking like the default for halflings or hobbits is a thief, that is the cliche, right?
Yeah, well, so there's like, so as of like 3rd edition, right? There's a preferred class, and they did specify thief or rogue or whatever they call it for halfling. So I can see why they get that expectation. I guess one thing I should point out, obviously, is in original D&D, hobbits are limited to 4th level fighters, but as soon as the thief comes in, they're unlimited capacity at thieves. There's no upper bound to that. So they, in some sense, they are specialized at being thieves.
Interesting.
I don't know if you've run into this, but when I wrote OED, I kind of assumed that people would be looking at original D&D and using this as a supplement. So I didn't write in the level limits, even though I'm assuming I'm just going to do the same thing as an original. So I've had some players not know about that and then get surprised, when they, at a later date, when they hit the level limit and they don't know the difference. Should I add that to OED to clarify that?
Totally up to you, because I will not use it.
Oh, you don't use level limits?
I don't use level limits at all. Let me tell you how I came in this direction. Yeah. So, originally I was using BX. And does BX have level limits? I think maybe it does.
Yes.
Or at least it has things like elf as a class, right? Where elf is your fighter There's no multi-classing because the demi-humans are innately multi-classed, right? Your elf is your fighter magic user. Okay, so at some point, I started, before I switched to OED, I was like, let me use BX with some house. Let me start house ruling BX a bit. And one of the things I did is I introduced a race class split. And the way I still allowed for multi-classing, but there be some penalty, I didn't want just everyone to be an elf all the time because it's just better, is I just made it more expensive to level up. So rather than a cap, it was simply cost more XP, which is true to those original charts. Right, so it became like an add-on of like, okay, you could be a fighter or magic user or a fighter magic user, whatever you want, but if you're going to be an elf, there's an extra 20% XP cost to every level all the time.
Yeah.
When I got to OED, and I think at that time, I'm not sure how well you spell out multi-classing at this point, I started using level capping as my balance for multi-classing. So basically, I say anyone can be a single-class character with no level limit at all, and if you multi-class, your second class is level capped at 8, and your third class is level capped at 4. Because those are pretty interesting levels to cap at 8th level. Your wizard won't get as high as his 6th level spells. Your fighter won't get the next feat. Does your thief get quadruple damage?
In OED, yes. In original D&D, they'd get it at 5, 9, 13, right. But in OED, it's 4, 8, 12.
Yeah, and then likewise at 4, right? At 4 is an interesting level to cap at because you'll never get that fireball.
Yeah, and it echoes the original level caps of halfling at 4, elf at 4, fighter 8, wizard.
So I've been using level capping for multiclass to balance multiclass. So I do not use it as a race balance point.
Gotcha. It's one of those things I don't have it written in OED because I'm just using straight by the book original D&D.
Right.
And so I don't bother to put in that I'm modifying any rules. But that's caused a little bit of confusion because people didn't know about them originally.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they're unhappy, I suppose, when they hit the cap and you go, oh, sorry, you can't level up anymore.
Yeah, and someone just mentioned that they're putting XP into their elf fighter level when they already capped it.
Yeah.
When they already capped it.
Unfortunately,
they could have been putting XP in their wizard level.
Straight level caps like that, as well as level drain, I think are rules from old school D&D that are simply not fun. I've never. Yes, I understand the want to use them as a balance point, but I feel like I'm always ruining someone's day and making the game less fun for them by implementing them. So I try to get rid of them.
Okay, so here's something I shouldn't say. A reasonable point. Once again, I think that's a world building. There's also a world building aspect, and I think that comes up in Gygax's DM's guide. Is that why do humans run everything and not elves or dwarves? And the answer is, well, because there's some kind of essential cap on their skill level.
Well,
I'll say maybe the core rule in my game is the same as original D&D, and maybe somewhere in the campaign there are supernatural elements that can possibly remove those caps, maybe, or modify them.
Excellent.
It's campaign. Maybe it's
Yep.
campaign based.
Gotcha.
Maybe a magic item.
All right.
Right. But I don't mind for world building purposes having those caps there.
Maybe there's a topic we should return to in another stream.
Great. Good point.
Excellent.
Excellent point.
Any last thoughts on Thieves?
I like Thieves, and I think that for world building purposes and conjuring sword and sorcery pulp, they are essential. And for me, the core three, and I think that this gets repeated in lots of games and other places, the core three is fighters and wizards and thieves, and I think they've got to be there, and they're way more essential than clerics.
Interesting. For me, I have trouble removing anything from, because I feel like the core four are so ingrained in our heads as D&D, fighter, magic user, cleric, thief, and so removing any of them is always a little awkward. If I was going to remove one, though, thief is my first choice, simply because I find that oddity of a skill-based system to be really unfun. I know it at least in the case of Thieves, all the skills are physical, so we don't get into the point of I'm rolling diplomacy, so I don't have to talk. But it's a step in that direction, and so it would be the first on my hit list to get rid of if I was going to get rid of one.
Well, I respect your lunatic opinion.
All right, I think that about wraps it up for us on Thieves. Thanks everyone for joining us. I think we'll be back in 2 weeks, which I believe is the 13th.
Sunday, January 13th at 1 o'clock. Yes.
Great, excellent. So we've been keeping our eye on the chat log as we have these conversations. So please do feel free to drop in, leave us some comments. You may spin our discussion in a weird and different direction. Or leave us some comments here on our YouTube channel, and we'll always be happy to respond and possibly use it in our next stream.
Subscribe to the channel is always appreciated as well.
That's right. Great. Thanks everyone for joining us. See you next time.
Very good.